Hey everyone, today we are going to do an exercise in color matching. So before we commit ourselves to doing a painting of an object, I wanted us to look at a photo reference and really try to match the colors that are inside it. So that way when you try to do a painting, it's not the very first time that you're trying to match colors on a photo. So in order to do this, we start in Procreate and we're going to make something like this. I have a couple that are already set up for you, but I super suggest that you do your own photo that you're planning on doing for your project and you get your own swatches from there. So there's another video on that. We're going to end up with a painting that looks like this. So not a full painting, I'm definitely not doing the photo right now, but I'm trying to match the colors that I've pulled from here. And so in order to do this, you only really need half a sheet of paper. So in order to not waste, let's start by taking our watercolor paper. So again, your watercolor paper is a little bit thicker and can hold the watercolors a lot better than your sketchbook paper can. So you're gonna take this and fold it in half. So take it like a book or like a card and put those corners together. And you're gonna press along this edge. It might help if you take something like a pencil or like one of your brushes to do that. And I like to go back and forth with that, so I'll fold it the other way, just kind of continually until it's nice and sharp. You can also take some water if you want to and go over the edges. That'll kind of soften them so that it's easier for you to tear a little bit later down the line. So I'll do that to both sides. Again, just going back and forth and really folding that. And so now it should be easy to rip it. It's a little difficult only because it's thicker, so you want to be careful that you folded it enough times. And then you're going to just gently try to get that. If that looks kind of difficult for you, you can always take scissors to it after you fold it in half, but I kind of like the edge that it gives. So you can save the other half of it if you would like to for the future. I actually use this as scrap paper. So I'll cut this up into other pieces if I don't have like the back of something to use. And I use that to test some swatches before I do my final. So notice that my final painting is like really neat. There's not a lot extra on there, and that's because I've used my scrap paper to test everything out. So the process for how to mix colors starts with making sure that you have all your supplies ready. So I have my clean water. I actually always have like 2 cups of clean water, but you really only need 1. You're gonna take your brushes. I'm gonna use this just for hydrating my watercolors in the pan, but I'm mostly going to be using this today. And then your actual pan set. So we don't really need a lot. This is the basis for what we have. We need paper towels as usual to kind of control things. And then, as I said, I like to have another piece of scrap paper. So it can be something that we've used before. So you can see this one I've used before. Notice that I paint along the edges, and you'll see why I do that in a second. So just a little piece of paper. I like to have a couple of these as I'm testing out my colors to make sure that they're as accurate as they can be. As I said, I'm going to hydrate every single color that I see. Unless you have one of the Angora sets, then as usual, we want to just pretend we don't have white. So if I want to make something lighter, I'm going to use the white of the paper, and I'm going to use the water and that transparency to make things lighter. So white does not exist. Please do not get that ready. Otherwise, please add some water to all of your paint, even if you don't think that you're going to be using a color. So I'll give you an example as I pull out my photo. So in this photo here, you don't really see any real yellows, you don't see blues or oranges at all, but I've definitely got those ready, and you'll probably see me use those today. You only have anywhere from like 12 to 14 colors, and like if you notice like, oh, there's 3 different browns that I've pulled out of the butterfly. That means that this single brown that I have, if it was right, is probably not right for all 3 of those. So I'm gonna have to make those. And that's what I use the top for. So remember that that top is for mixing your colors. We're gonna use our scrap paper to test it down, and then we'll finally put that final color on our sheet of paper. You don't have to label it like I have here. I just think it's a little bit neater. All you need to do is put your name on it. So today I'm going to demo for you how I mix certain colors and mostly the process for how that works. So let's start out at the top. I'm going to demo these first 3 colors for you because I think that they're just the easiest ones for now. And so you don't need to watch me do all 9 of them. So to start out with, let's look at the brown because brown is one of the most difficult colors for people to mix. You do have one right here, but if I test that out, so we can make a little swatch of it. So I'll just take that purely from the pan and I'm gonna swipe it against the edge. The reason I swipe against the edge is so that I can hold it against my actual paper. So you see that I'm holding it against there and those don't look anything alike. This is way too orange compared to the brown that I have swatched there. So I'm going to make my own brown instead that I think is better. So brown is a neutral color and we make neutral colors by mixing complements. I'm gonna clean off my brush. And this brown to me, if I compare it to other things, looks a little bit more on the green side. So I'm actually going to start by mixing a fairly dense amount of green. And after that, to neutralize it, to make it a brown, I'm going to use the complement, so the opposite color. Green is the opposite of red, so I'm going to take some red, good amount of it to create some balance, and I'm going to mix those together like this. This is still too green, I can tell, but if you need to swatch it and check, then you can. I'm going to keep going. And notice like how much I'm making. It doesn't need to be like flooding the whole thing, but I need enough that I'm going to test it and be able to paint it down. So compared to the brown that comes with it, this one is a lot darker, a lot less orange than that. To me, that still doesn't look right. I can hold it up against here and check. It's closer to the one in the middle. So if I compare those 2 colors, the one on the top is a little bit brighter and has a little bit more yellow or a little bit more green in it. So I'm going to take my yellow, or I think like my orange might work also, but I'll just start with the yellow. And just make adjustments as I go along. So this is a little bit better now. Definitely a different color when I paint it down. If I hold it up against my swatch, that matches pretty well. So I can paint that down on my actual final. I want to go in the same order so that when I put this on my document, like a notability, that I can tell which swatch you were trying to go. If you do this out of order, I'll get very confused. So in the same order, this goes at the top right corner. And this is going to dry fairly light. That's what watercolor does, is once the water evaporates, it's not going to have that sheen to it. So it's definitely going to dry a little bit lighter. I might want to save this color for when that dries and do another layer. And to kind of help it along, I'll load up my brush, so really get a lot of paint in there. And I can kind of tap at my paper and drop some color in there. That works for now while I'm just making these swatches. So there's my first color. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the bottom one, or sorry, the middle one. So the middle color is this really bright green. Most of the sets also have that really bright green in there. Again, if I take directly from there and try to paint that and compare it, it's kind of close, but this is a little bit brighter, so a little too neon for what that looks like. This is just a tiny bit more neutralized and more saturated than that. And so start with my base color, paint it down, decent amount of water in there. Notice that I can make stuff right next to another pile of paint as long as they're not super wet, so they're not contaminating each other. And because this is too bright, again, I can take another color to neutralize it. It can be the complement usually. You can add a tiny bit of black, but you should usually be careful with adding black. I almost never use it. Bless me. And so that green is just a little more neutral than my initial one. So you can see that when you compare them together. And when I paint that down, that's actually a lot closer than our initial one is. So don't let your eyes trick you going like, oh, that's bright green, and so I'll just use the bright green that I have, but really try to match it as best as you can to that. And so a lot of people are surprised that that bright green has just a little bit of red in it, but it does. Now, since mine is printed, it's a lot easier for me to get very close to these colors. If you're just comparing to your iPad screen, the iPad screens or screens in general just have a lot of blue light behind there. So the colors aren't really going to look super similar because your paper just isn't illuminated like that. So as long as you get pretty close, you should be good. So there's my next swatch. Again, I'll just save that color in case I need to go over it with another layer. And I will move on to my last one. And I like to do this one for demo because it's very light. And so remember that when I want to make a color lighter, I'm not adding white, but I'm adding more water so that the paper shows up more. So my paper is already white. That just means I need to add a little bit of color on top of it. So for this, I have like a magenta. If you don't, then you can start with kind of a violet color, add a little bit of red to it. But red-violet is roughly where I want to end up. So I'll put down some magenta. And let's just swatch that to like see where it's at compared to my photo. So again, the process is that you mix at the top, swatch on your scrap paper, and then compare. This is pretty similar as long as I keep that much water, but I'm gonna add a tiny bit more violet to it just to cool it down slightly. Decent amount of water. Make sure your water is clean for this. Test it. Test again. There we go. So I go through quite a bit of those before I put a color down if I'm like super trying to match it. And this time, as it dries, it should end up that light. For comparison, I'll show you the one next to it. It's going to have a lot more paint. So the one next to this, I really load a lot of paint onto here. Again, just a tiny bit more purple in there to cool that down. Take that, swatch that. Good match. And then I'll paint it. So if I wanted to make this lighter, I'd add a lot of water. But as it is, should be good. So you're gonna continue until you have all 9 minimum of your colors. If you want to add the labels, you can draw those in or you can paint them. But just remember that process. So mix up at the top, neutralize with the complementary color, lighten with water, do a test, and then once you have the final one, then you can paint it down. So please don't mix on your actual paper. If you make a mistake and get paint somewhere, then you can try your best to like quickly scrub it while it's still wet with super clean water. And then it might stain, but you can usually quickly pick up at least most of it. So if something like that happens and you want to clean up, then you can do that. But not very big of a deal. When you're done, you're going to add this picture along with the one that you put in Procreate or the one that you took from me and compare them. When you do this, sometimes your colors won't look as good as they do in person. So if I take a picture of this, I'm probably going to have to go in and edit it a little bit, so I can go in Procreate and kind of mess with the colors a little, or I can just go into the photo editing and kind of bring up the saturation. Usually the camera doesn't catch the saturation, so these won't look super similar if I compare it to what's on my screen. Usually the warmth I have to bring up a little bit in the vibrancy. So play around with those things, get it as close to your photo as possible, and then next time we'll maybe make an attempt at our actual photos for painting. So good luck.